It's a long-held belief by many that the existence of franchises is a detriment to entire industries. While given the current norm, I don't necessarily think that's wrong. I don't think it has to remain true forever. And the Legend of Zelda franchise has been exemplary of every angle of this discussion imaginable. Let's talk about it. Obviously, the concept of franchises predates the advent of the modern gaming industry by quite a bit.
It's alive!
But the principle remains the same. If we didn't have them, the industry wouldn't grow. That's just a fact that you can spin however you want depending on your level of cynicism. People need something to latch onto, and familiarity is an easy endpoint. And let's be real, creating new ideas that stick is no small feat. So successful creatives in this space generally prefer to have a strong one or 10 to fall back on in case any potential attempts at newer ideas fall through. While some may scoff at this practice and call it lazy, when done well, it can actually free up developers to try new ideas within an established fan base that they couldn't have safely tried otherwise. New properties don't often demand the same budgets as established commodities, or the same power to spend the time needed to get it just right, or attract the same level of talent dying to leave their mark on a beloved property. And in their own way, franchises push the industry to continually introduce new ideas to compete with what other established IP have accomplished. If Dragon Warrior, Dragon Quest for us outside of Japan of course, hadn't taken off, who's to say Pokemon would have the success it knows today? Or even further than that, who's to say Pokemon would exist at all? Many careers start in this industry thanks to the influence that comes part and parcel with being a successful franchise. I'm sure we all can think of a fun fact or two regarding some highly respected creative being inspired to do what they do because they played a game or saw a film or even read a book in a successful franchise growing up, and that gave them the drive and or knowledge to create their own. There's perhaps no greater example of the pros and cons of franchises than the impact the Legend of Zelda franchise has had on this industry. An impact that persists and continues to evolve to this day with plenty of highs and lows along the way. It's for that reason, I think the best way to talk about the pros and cons of franchising in games is by discussing the trajectory the Legend of Zelda had through the years. The original Legend of Zelda game on NES was created alongside Super Mario Bros. With the intention for the two games to entirely contrast each other in their philosophies. Mario was about linear acrobatic feats, straightforward combat. Zelda was about complex problem solving, weapon and tool based combat, and it was a bit more lore driven. The Legend of Zelda was a well of mystery and wonder when it initially released, and as a result, a fantastic conduit of water cooler conversations, wherein kids traded stories of random bushes they accidentally lit on fire and found an unexpected surprise, or stories of how they accidentally got through a late game dungeon earlier on in the game than was intended, or even more important to the value of the game, before their friend group did. Maybe they never ended up finding the old man, learning of the danger of going alone and taking the sword, but found other means to complete the game anyway. The original Zelda game truly was about exploration and discovery to an extent that goes beyond the basic discovery of unlocking a cutscene after clearing level 2 or whatever. No other games did this quite as well before it, and very few even have since. That's not to say it was perfect. It has a lot of problems that would definitely result in a middling game had it been released tomorrow, but what it did well was compelling, and it led the pack for that reason. And as a result, we got many games after, and this feels like the perfect time to segue into talking about what makes the act of franchising bad in games, because Zelda definitely flirted with being bad on more than one occasion for falling for some of these traps.
Gee, it sure is boring around here.
My boy, this peace is what all true warriors strive for.
The negative side of franchises comes in three primary forms in my opinion. 1. A series creator didn't have the foresight required to sustain the level of quality a fan base grows to expect. 2. Missteps within a series facilitated by the blind loyalty of fans. Or 3. A franchise becomes a parody of itself by chasing the direct appeal of past releases. All of these things have varying results, and much like the elements that can make franchises good, it's definitely informed by the existence of franchises as a practice, but it's not a guaranteed symptom. In other words, bad franchises exist, good franchises exist. Just because the term franchise is a common denominator doesn't mean it's the problem. In fact, Zelda veered dangerously close into bad franchise territory, and the fault would have been on one of the franchise's crown jewels, The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. Obviously, a lot of people love Ocarina of Time. Some of our regular viewers may know that I, for one, am not one of those fans. But the game itself, in terms of quality, is neither here nor there in regards to why I think it was a low point in the overall history of the Legend of Zelda series. Quite the contrary, actually. I think Ocarina of Time was too good in a lot of ways for its time, many of which Nintendo nor anyone else for a long time could properly replicate, let alone innovate or even iterate on in a meaningful way. The issue then became Nintendo chasing that game's shadow through creating copies of a copy until they ended up with Skyward Sword, and the public opinion of Zelda finally began to sour. They fell into the trap that many franchises do. They fell in love with the end result but lost sight of what got them there in the beginning. The original Legend of Zelda had a starting point that inspired its designers to shoot for the stars, with the only limit being their own imagination and the technology that was available to them, the original NES. When making Ocarina of Time, the limitation became that franchise benchmark. They wanted to make a game that was true to that original, but in a three-dimensional space. And this, to be fair, took more of a creative vision than, say, Link to the Past, which is largely great because it took lessons learned from the original, and to a certain, arguably lesser extent, Zelda 2, and made the best version of that formula with the added power and flexibility afforded to them by a more powerful console in the form of the SNES, and a franchise that was by this point battle tested and fan approved. Ocarina of Time had to do what Link to the Past did, but without the benefit of certain problems being solved for them by past outings. They had to figure out how to make combat not only functional, but fun again, with the addition of a true constant Z-axis, necessitating them to throw the old combat system out and start over. They had to figure out how movement should work and feel, how to make characters look compelling with the added detail of three-dimensional models as opposed to two-dimensional sprites. And based on its current place in the gaming community's average opinion, they succeeded at that. However, that success ultimately led to what many would say is complacency, but I'd quicker say they became obsessed with chasing that golden goose. Either way, the result was many games that you can copy my homework but change it up a bit so the teacher doesn't find outed Ocarina of Time to death, and left Zelda games, particularly of the 3D variety, feeling dull, repetitive, and comparatively hollow for nearly 2 decades. Sure, Ocarina of Time was great for its time, but the thing that made it great was using its place in time as a crutch, and the name recognition as the other crutch. Everything that was special about that game was the solutions it had for translating the existing Zelda formula to 3D. That'd be all well and good, but once technology wasn't presenting a direct, immediate, inherent problem that called for creative solutions, it only started to serve subsequent games as a means to prettier coats of paint, rather than finding better ways to solve new problems, or even better than that, trying new things, which in turn would inevitably create new problems to solve and thereby create an opportunity for even more creative solutions. Your first thought may be, wait, but Majora's Mask had a darker tone, Wind Waker had boats, or whatever other narrative or theming centric change the Zelda team introduced in Zelda games following the dive into the third dimension, but none of those things moved the series forward. They just slightly masked the fact that at the end of the day, Zelda peaked at Link to the Past and began a steady decline since. That is until Nintendo finally decided it was time to do something about it. I don't need to tell you that Breath of the Wild is phenomenal. Many people understand that much, but what I feel even now, many people don't give Breath of the Wild credit for is how and why it was created in the first place. So few games and long-running successful franchises see creators digging down to the root in the way Breath of the Wild's creators did. So few franchise creators look to see what about the original entry in their series made it special, and even more than that, what problems it was created to solve. They just try to do a better version of what they did last time. The most important thing that Breath of the Wild did, though, was answer what the creators of the original Legend of Zelda would have done if they were making it now with the resources they have available to them in the present day. They didn't work from a framework as tightly defined as making a follow-up to last time. They let their only framework be the much more abstract target of what they felt the core of Zelda is in terms of its design in a vacuum, and work from there. What about the current formula is inherent? What about it was little more than conventions that, sure, at one point may have existed out of necessity, but now only persist because that initial solution was well received to the point of it feeling essential moving forward? And what new things could be added to the formula that weren't possible when these initial conventions came to be that are true to Zelda's core and are possible now? These questions very clearly were the driving force behind every big win present in Breath of the Wild. Almost nothing about it can be directly attributed to any other single game. Obviously, past Zelda games informed this design, but even more important than that, other successful contemporaries informed its design as well. There's Portal's DNA, Minecraft, Skyrim's, Shadow of the Colossus, and so many others, and not in the way that, say, Immortals Phoenix Rising pretty blatantly ripped it off, only really aiming to change or add what detractors of its inspiration say it failed to do. Breath of the Wild looks at the core of what made the mechanics it was inspired by do well and adapted it to the game they wanted to make. This resulted in a game that is greater than the sum of its parts, because the parts they chose and the way they went about choosing to use them intermingled and flowed perfectly. The thing about franchises, though, is even this isn't something they should feel satisfied with. The nature of a franchise means they have to always be improving. The takeaway can't be that they made the new benchmark game to imitate. The takeaway should be that the way they made that game needs to be a guiding light for every developer that hopes to care for their franchises a modicum as much as the Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild team managed to do this time around for theirs. Now, with the sequel on the way, I feel we're at an inflection point. The easy home run swing is pretty simple. Fans want Breath of the Wild again, but with more traditional temples. I think this would be fine in the short term, and it could make for a massively successful game. But the approach that could keep the series moving forward would be not to chase the end result of Breath of the Wild, but rather to put themselves in the same place they were in when they originally made it. Making Breath of the Wild again would hold many over for a very long time, but it also puts them at risk of being right back where they were after Skyward Sword when it's all said and done. This game, or at the very least the games that follow, should make people feel the way the original did, and that'll take a lot more than copying and iterating. I hope they know that. Franchises are done best when the only persistent element is core characters and themes. Everything else should often be reinvented with modern sensibilities and past lessons serving as the guiding force to keep everything at its best. What do you think? Leave your thoughts in the comments or at me on Twitter. If you want to support this channel, check out our Patreon to see if any of the available tiers are a good fit for you. If you want to hang out with the community, our free to join Discord server is linked in the description alongside that and our social media accounts. Above all, subscribe to Redirect and ring the bell to be notified when new videos go live. Okay, that's it for me. See you in the next video.